In 1981, one of Kodak's largest customers asked the company a simple question. Should we be worried about digital photography? Kodak's head of market intelligence ran a study to find out. According to his own account, it came back with two answers. Yes, digital could replace film. And Kodak had roughly a 10-year window to prepare. Kodak had the warning, Kodak had the window, and what everybody remembers is that Kodak ignored digital and died. Kodak did not ignore digital. By 2005, Kodak was the #1 seller of digital cameras in the United States. 7 years later, it filed for bankruptcy. To understand the decision, you have to understand how Kodak made money, because it was not really by selling cameras. Kodak sold cameras cheaply, sometimes at almost nothing, because every camera it put in a house created a customer who would buy film for the next 20 years. Film, then processing, then prints. The camera was the hook, film was the business, and film was an extraordinary business. The published figures vary, and they are not strictly comparable, but they all point the same way. Film earned margins that very few consumer products have ever matched. It also produced a company at a scale that is easy to forget now. As late as 1976, Kodak accounted for about 90% of film sales and 85% of camera sales in the United States. By 1988, it employed more than 145,000 people. At its revenue peak in 1996, it took in close to $16 billion, and it still held more than 2/3 of the global market. This was not a niche manufacturer that got caught out. For most of the 20th century, Kodak was photography. The phrase, "a Kodak moment," was in ordinary English. People use the brand name as a verb. Now, the part of this story you have already heard. In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson built the first digital camera. It existed. It worked. Kodak had it first. That fact appears in almost every telling of this story, and it explains almost nothing. The prototype captured about 1/100th of a megapixel and took 23 seconds to record a single image onto cassette tape. No company reorganizes itself around a laboratory prototype like that in 1975 with an exceptionally profitable product line sitting on the other side of the building. If you want the decision that actually mattered, it does not happen in 1975. It happened 6 years later in a research report. 1981. Vince Barabba, Kodak's head of market intelligence, runs an extensive study with the backing of the chief executive. A note on sourcing before we go further. The report itself has never been published. What we have is Barabba's own account, given publicly many times since. So treat what follows as his recollection, not as a document anyone has read. By that account, the study concluded two things. Digital photography had the capability to replace Kodak's film business, and Kodak had roughly a 10-year window in which adoption would stay limited enough for the company to prepare. That is a good study. It got the direction right, and it bought the company real time. Most companies facing disruption never get anything that clear. Kodak's response was to use digital technology to improve film, not to replace film, to improve it. Better scanning, better processing, better prints. Digital in service of the chemical business. And then, in 1986, Kodak's own laboratories built the first practical megapixel sensor. The direction Barabba had described was becoming real inside Kodak's own building. What did not change after that was the economic logic. Be precise here, because this is where most tellings of this story get lazy. Kodak did an enormous amount of digital work over the next 20 years. Sensors, a professional digital camera system in 1991, photo CD, printing kiosks, online photo services. It bought an online photo company. It sold millions of consumer digital cameras. What stayed constant underneath all of it was the assumption that digital would feed printing, processing, and consumables. Kodak kept building a world where photographs still ended up on paper. It never redesigned the company around a world where most photographs would never be printed at all. Now argue Kodak's side, using only what was known at the time. First, the window was real. Acting immediately in 1982 would have meant deliberately cannibalizing an exceptionally profitable product line in favor of a business whose customers, standards, and margins were all still uncertain. Second, film was carrying everything: the dividend, the research labs, over 100,000 jobs. You do not get to run the experiment where Kodak moves capital out of film in 1982 and the rest of the company simply carries on. Third, and this is the part people skip, using digital to improve film was not denial. It was a real strategy that produced real products and real revenue for more than a decade. Kodak was not asleep. Kodak was executing. And fourth, name the board that approves shifting capital out of the highest margin business in the company into an unproven one, at a margin nobody can yet calculate, on a 10-year timeline. The direction was called correctly. The strategy was defensible. It ended in bankruptcy anyway, and the reason is not the one you are expecting. Kodak built digital cameras. Kodak marketed digital cameras. Kodak sold an enormous number of digital cameras. By 2005, Kodak was the #1 seller of digital cameras in the United States. This is the company that supposedly ignored digital. It was beating Sony and Canon on its home market. And in that same year, Kodak reported a net loss of $1.36 billion. Now, be careful with those two facts because the easy version of this story puts them next to each other and calls it cause and effect. It is not that simple. Kodak said most of that loss came from non-cash charges against deferred tax assets and from the cost of restructuring the company at speed. It was not a bill for selling cameras. But the contrast still points at the real problem, and the real problem is this: film and the products around it earned margins that very few consumer businesses have ever matched. Consumer digital cameras were the opposite. They were becoming a fiercely competitive electronics category. Components came from suppliers, models turned over quickly, prices fell fast, and every major consumer electronics company on Earth was in the market. In the earlier years, when Kodak was buying its way in, it was reported to be selling some cameras at or below cost to take share. And there is a second half to this that matters more than the cameras. In film, Kodak sold you a camera once and then sold you consumables forever. Every holiday, every birthday, every school photograph came back to Kodak as a roll of film and a print order. The camera was the hook. The film, the processing, and the prints were the business. In digital, Kodak could still sell you a camera and sometimes a print. But there was no roll of film and no processing after every set of pictures. As photographs moved onto screens, more and more of them produced no revenue for Kodak at all. The razor stayed, the blades disappeared. Meanwhile, the old business was going fast. Kodak's traditional revenue, which covered film and the products and services around it, fell 18% in 2005 alone. So look at what Kodak had actually achieved. It had reached the new market, it led the new market in its own country, and leading it did not begin to pay for losing the old one, because a unit of digital market share was worth a fraction of a unit of film market share. Kodak carried much of its brand and its distribution into the new market. It reached millions of digital customers. What it could not carry across was the profit system underneath them. In January 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Read the popular version of this story again. Kodak invented digital photography and ignored it, and that is why Kodak died. Kodak did not ignore it. Kodak arrived. Kodak led. Arriving was not enough. Call it the margin cliff. Go back to the 1981 study for a moment, because by the standards of corporate forecasting, it was very good. It asked whether digital would replace film. The answer was yes, and the direction was right. It asked how long Kodak had. It gave the company a preparation window, and the window was real. What is far less visible in the surviving account is the economic question that also mattered. Not only whether the new technology would arrive, or when, but what a customer would be worth on the other side of it. Here is the mechanism, and it is not about being slow. When the replacement product is real and you build it and you actually take the leading position in it, but the money in the new market sits somewhere else, then leading it does not save you. Market share crosses a technology transition. Profit pools do not. In photography, the value moved into sensors, into consumer electronics, into phones, into software, into the platforms where people shared pictures instead of printing them. Kodak reached the new market. It did not own the places where the new market kept its money. That is a harder failure to see than simple delay. A company can hit every major product milestone, take the #1 position, and still discover that most of its industry's value has moved onto somebody else's balance sheet. So here's the test. For any transition your industry is facing, do not start by asking when the new thing arrives. Everybody asks that, and it is the easy question. Ask where the profit will sit once it does. Ask what one customer will be worth to you on the other side. Then ask whether the company you have built can exist at that number. Kodak could answer the first question in 1981, with years to spare. The second question is the one Kodak did not solve in time. Kodak measured what was coming. It did not measure what would be left. The next one measured everything. That turned out to be the problem.